Hey guys, welcome to the Wolf Digest. I am your host, Ammaross.
And I am your co-host, Terkanil. Today, our topics involve news from AMD, as well as some rumors, news out of the UK and China, some news regarding some problems with Google, again, as well as some news and rumors regarding the Galaxy phones, some sciencey news, news from Toshiba, and a little gaming movie pop news.
So first up on the list, we're going to be talking about the new Athlon 200GE. It's a new Zen Vega chip. Actually has 2 cores, 4 threads, and those are Zen Plus cores. And we're actually running a Vega 3 inside, so it might have a little bit of GPU performance. We're probably talking something pretty low level here. LOL, World of Warcraft, Dota maybe. So nothing too terrible.
That's if you turn things down.
No, it according to the reviews, it does have a little bit of spunk in that regard. I mean, they have some Civ 6 graphic benchmarks, things like that, but we're still talking pretty low on the AI test. As far as frames per second, we're looking in the mid 40s for your 1080p gaming. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's top notch for a low end CPU, and you're going to get a much better performance out of some of the lower i3s, your Pentium CPUs, even some of the Ryzen 3 APUs that they have out there. I'd say the biggest differentiating factor with this one is going to be its price point. It's at $55. And you compare that to even like the low end Intel, you're looking at what, the 4620G, no, the G4620, and you're in the $105 range. So this is at half the price. If you take like Tom's Hardware benchmarks, do their aggregate score, it's roughly in the 48 mark, as opposed to the Pentium, which is in the 57 mark. You're talking 20% performance underneath the low end Pentium there, but it's at half the price.
Well, even some of the lower end Pentiums in the Pentium Gold combo are fairly low priced and do outdo it a little bit, but there's much you can say about that price point, because then you're at that point also combining with the rest of the hardware.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't be taking this thing and strapping it next to even a 580 or a 1050 Ti. That's definitely going to unbalance your system. Yeah, if you have that kind of money, just go with the Ryzen 3 2200 or 2400, right?
And the other nice thing is it's still lower power.
It is. It's rated at 35 watts, which is pretty low power. And I've seen some of the Bristol Ridge stuff, some of the bulldozer based cores. They're just quad cores, well, pseudo cores. And I actually have one in my firewall, actually. I did a VM running Sophos XG, and it actually has one of those old bulldozer cores. But it was a $35 chip. It's rated at barely 25 watts. So I figured it'd be good for a low power application like that. And that's kind of where I see this CPU really. I don't really see it as a gaming CPU, but more something for a little toy box, so to speak.
You're something low power you can stick on your desk that doesn't take up a whole lot of room.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe even a lightweight file server. I'm sure a lot of people would love to build a NAS out of it.
I'm sure you could pull that off.
Definitely. It also brings us to some
I
of.
also like to say on that last one is that it also runs higher power RAM, at least for what it's worth.
So, like a higher clock speed on the RAM?
Oh yeah, especially if you compare it to like the lowest end Intels. So,
Yeah.
for what it's worth, there is that much.
Well, like the lower end Intels, this one's also multiplier locked.
Mostly.
Mostly. Some of the some of the motherboard manufacturers have enabled a little bit of a unlocked multiplier on it. You kind of have to bump up the front side bus, that kind of stuff. So not necessarily like overclocking.
Not completely, but at least for that curiosity, there is information out there from several locations.
Yeah, there's plenty of information out there on how to actually get a little bit of an overclock out of it, bump up the resulting clock speed. But it's only locked at 3.2 gigahertz base clock, so that's not bad either way.
But going on from there, I mean, we at least also have some rumors to play with.
We do. We have some nice, delicious leaks from Adored TV. He's got a YouTube channel, and he's actually got some nice new information that's got a little bit of backing. A few other sites have had some kind of similar information. There was a post on Reddit that got retracted pretty quick, but he's talking about the new 3000 series Ryzen CPUs, as well as a bit of Navi, the new GPU that's going to be coming out. And if you didn't notice, AMD actually went and trademarked a Vega 2 logo, or at least what people have assumed is a Vega 2 logo. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It has that traditional Vega V, but with a couple of slashes on the right side.
I have missed this.
It marks a 2.
Down.
So we might be seeing a Vega 2 branding coming out shortly. But back to the speculation at hand. The thing of note is that we're basically looking at 6-core 12-thread as your base Ryzen 3 now. You got your usual clock speeds in the 3 to 3.4 gigahertz across the board until you get to some of the better silicon. At the Ryzen 7 3700 and 3700X, we're looking at 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz base clock with boosts up to like 4.65 gigahertz range. That's going to be nice, guys. And those Ryzen 7s are going to be 12 core, 24 thread. That's where it gets delicious.
Much nicer than some of the stuff we're running right now.
Yeah, and they're going to drop in at the same price point as the current Ryzen 7s. We're talking about 300 to 330 kind of range for these CPUs, which will definitely put a nail in the coffin for some of Intel's i-series lineup, especially like the i5s that are currently in that price range. There's not going to be any competition. They're going to have 8 cores. That's it. No extra
the nice thing
threads.
about what we've been seeing out of AMD lately is that while it may not be as fast as Intel, I mean, simply put, the i9-9900K is the fastest CPU.
In gaming.
But, well, in gaming and even some of the workloads.
Well, yeah, because it's got the 8-core 16 thread, just like the current Ryzens.
Yeah, the kicker, however, is that while AMD is a small percentage behind it, it's substantially cheaper.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did see one is in stock over on Amazon. They finally got one in stock, right? It's $539. It's like, what? You could have picked up a 16-core Threadripper first gen for barely $450 over the Black Friday weekend. I mean, would you rather have 8 cores, 16 thread, or 16 cores, 32 thread? That's kind of a no-brainer. The only reason why you would go with the Intel would be gaming, right?
That's one of the biggest things. Even then, you'd have to be going for seriously high-end gaming and have to really mean it.
Well, not even that. If you go to 4K and things like that, the difference goes away. You don't have an FPS difference. It's only at like 1080p and below that you see an FPS difference.
And even that difference isn't really all that big. And then once you go higher, there's still a difference, but that margin narrows.
Yeah, it's mostly like a 6% difference, maybe even down to 4 now. But in some games, there is a notable difference. It's somewhat wide in a few games. But on the flip side, there are a few games where AMD actually ties with Intel, and you can't really see the difference. We're talking at 1080p still.
In a lot of these cases, we're looking at frame rates of over 100.
Yeah, I know. But either way, these Ryzen 7s with a 4.2 gigahertz base in the case of the 3700X, that's going to go a long way to closing that gap, especially with that 5 gigahertz boost clock. I mean, I kind of see that as the sweet spot CPU. You can probably step down to a Ryzen 5 3600X, which is like 4.0 and 4.8 gigahertz boost. That one would probably do pretty well against an Intel to get that IPC matching for single thread performance. But the thing that's a really big kicker, the new information, right, besides the extra few cores, is you got a new Ryzen 9 level where they have the 3800X and the 3850X. And just based on these numbers, the 3850 is going to be like 4.3 gigahertz base with a 5.1 gigahertz boost. I mean, that's crazy numbers for Ryzen CPU silicon. They haven't really been able to push past 4.3 gigahertz, even when you try. And now they're coming out of the gate with a boost clock of 5.1.
Yeah, that's bringing it up to par with Intel.
But you are going to pay a pretty penny for this. This is a $500 CPU, so almost just under what the current 9900K is at. But here's the kicker. This is a 16-core, 32-thread CPU.
So that's a lot more power by comparison.
Yeah, that's like getting the first or second gen Threadripper 16-core, but instead of having 3.2 as your base clock, you're getting 4.3 gigahertz with a boost up to 5.1, which is unheard of on any of the previous Ryzens.
And still, this is all rumor. We're still going to be waiting a bit to see this.
Yeah. But here's the thing.
According to what we're hearing, that's only CES that right around the corner here from we might actually hear about it.
Yeah, I think they're scheduled for the 6th of January. That's barely a month away. And
we know that we absolutely know that AMD has one of the initial fronts on the stage.
Yeah, that is known. They are one of the first people to be presenting at CES, and so that's going to be really exciting. And they actually, at their supercomputer, what was that conference for supercomputers? Either way, they made their announcement for EPYC.
Next Horizon, that's what it was.
Yeah, the next Horizon. They made their announcement of EPYC, and that's kind of where we're getting some of this information and the plausibility of this, because EPYC is going to be a central I/O die with chiplets. Basically, they're going to fab just CPU cores at 7 nanometer, and then they're going to have a 14 nanometer I/O die in the middle of all these chiplets. They actually showed a EPYC CPU. It was 64 cores, 128 threads, and it had 8 chiplets surrounding this I/O die. So it looks kind of similar to how Threadripper is doing it. But instead of using Infinity Fabric to tie those little chiplets together, they're actually using a type of Infinity Fabric to tie those CPU cores to the I/O die in order to access RAM and the PCI bus and things like that. So all of the chiplets are going to have the same latency hit, essentially, a performance hit. There's obviously going to be a performance hit with this kind of scale change, but cut out this. There's obviously going to be a little performance hit with this kind of a layout change, but they get it all back in spades with scalability and cost to manufacture. I mean,
and there's also the fact that if you look at how they built it, this is EPYC 2. So if a company happened to have picked up a server with an EPYC 1 chip, they can literally just plop in the new chip.
Yeah, it's a drop-in replacement, and that's the cool part that they were really trumping up as well, is that most of the existing motherboards would be able to just take this chip and just drop it in, just like your mainstream motherboards. If you had a X370, you could just drop in a Ryzen 2000 series and have it just work. I actually did that with my computer, and it's performing great.
And to give you an idea of how much of a market disruption this made, if you go back to the day when that announcement was made and look at the stocks for both Intel and Ryzen, you can tell to the minute when it happened.
Yeah, Intel took a little bit of a dive, and AMD took a nice bump. And it was only movement of maybe $1, but it wasn't much. It really wasn't.
It was still a moderate percentage change.
Yeah, what was it, like 6%? A little bit, a little bit. I think partly Intel's underwhelming performance as well, even though they've been selling chips so much that they can't keep them in stock. They're still not performing very well on the market due to this uprising from AMD's corner. I mean, this whole chiplet thing is going to be phenomenal for them in terms of cost to manufacture. And there's speculation that these new Ryzen desktop chips are going to be the same chiplet architecture, where they'll have a cut down IO die, probably the rejects from the 14 nanometer stuff, and then they'll have cut down versions of what could be 8-core CPU dies. I mean, Ryzen 7 having 12 cores, that's 2 dead dies per chiplet, and they could just put in 2 chiplets or something like that and have 12 cores, no problem. And then
according to some of the rumors that we're seeing, we are going to probably end up seeing Ryzen with onboard video.
That would be very interesting. It could very well just easily just drop one of those CPU cores and just put Navi in there, because that's also part of the rumor, is that they could just drop in a Navi GPU right where a CPU would have been, and they have this uniform memory access kind of thing where it would use the IO die to access GDDR, things like that, or any number of special cases like what Microsoft did with the Xbox, adding the EMC or EMC RAM, whatever it is, that 32 gig of cache they put on their GPU rather than doing what PlayStation did and actually getting more compute performance out of their GPU. But the one downside is the Ryzen 9s probably won't work in a non 570 motherboard. The new 570 chipset for the Ryzen 3000 series. So the rest of them, all the way up to the 12 cores, they should work just fine. They'll be backwards compatible, but they had some power output concerns with some of the lower end versions of the chipsets, where the power regulation may not be up to snuff. So I don't know.
It's certainly going to be interesting once next year hits, when we start getting some real information about this, and up to the point of actually, people getting these chips in their hands, and what kind of actual numbers we'll see with reviews and such.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to see the numbers. And what also will be interesting is how Intel responds, because they're rumoring having one of the 10-core high-end desktop chips end up in the mainstream line as well, just like the i9-9900K is currently in the quote-unquote mainstream, even though it's at $530. But having the 10-core with hyper-threading ought to make things interesting. But something else Intel is doing is they're starting to glue their CPUs together again.
I've heard about that with their server chips.
Yeah. They're announcing new chips where they're basically just gluing their 2 top-end Xeons together using their QPI to interact between them on the package, and then slotting that in. And of course, those servers are limited to dual socket, because they're essentially, if you put dual socket in there, you're running a quad socket motherboard kind of thing anyway. So I mean, they did this back when they introduced the Core 2 architecture, and they had the Core 2 quads come out, which were just glued together Core 2s. Yeah, I actually owned a E6600, and I upgraded it to a Q6600, which was just two of the E6600s glued together on the same die. It was pretty good for an upgrade, but they're just doing it again. They're just gluing these things together again. You remember the Pentium D days, right? When the Pentium 4 was lagging behind the XP. And so
yeah, Pentium D was an attempt at that, and oh man, the Ds were just horrible. The original duals.
well, their downfall was that front side bus. They were still limited at that 133 megahertz front side bus, and that was just killing them. And I mean, we've seen it today with the Threadrippers. That Infinity fabric is the one downside of the Threadrippers. Anything that has to jump that Infinity fabric to do thread communication between dies and just everything goes to pot. It takes 3 times as long.
Yeah, but at least we know that they are improving that because the new Epic 2 is starting to go into that realm.
Well, that's the cool thing is they're eliminating it, really. They're making all of the cores take a little performance hit, probably significantly less than they were getting before because they don't have to do this hodgepodge thing where they jump with the Infinity fabric. They're actually designing it to have that jump in mind. And so they're actually boosting their L3 cache and things like that so that they don't have to go out to the main IO die as much. And even when they do, it's going to have the same delay between each of the cores regardless. And so NUMA modes aren't going to really be a concern anymore. Everything's going to have the same latency. So who cares if it's on this die or that die and they have to talk to each other? Sure, it's going to be a little worse than if it was on the same die with adjacent CPU nodes, but you look at Intel's new mesh architecture, you can have the same situation there where it has to jump that mesh and traverse 4, even 7, 8 different cores in order to get to that far bottom right corner of their new mesh architecture. And the bigger they get, the slower it becomes. That's kind of the downside of that mesh architecture that Intel is doing for its high-end desktop chips and server CPUs.
Well, at least we know that the news coming out should be good. And while I wasn't that optimistic, in all honesty, before the first Ryzen's came out, this time it's sounding like it should be very good.
Well, you didn't really have a choice when the first Ryzen's came out. Your desktop had died like 5 months prior to Ryzen's launch. And I was telling you from the get-go, it's like, dude, you got to wait for the Ryzen's. But, your desktop died, so you ended up going...
My old desktop was going down, and we had no credible information on the Ryzen 1s at the time.
Yeah, I know. The only thing we had was rumors just like this one. And even with less credibility than this one, we just had those hints from AMD saying, trust us, it's 40% faster. Yeah, 40% faster than Bulldozer. I could push my car down the street and be faster than Bulldozer. But
either way, my 6-core down there is still kicking along. So
yep. You did end up with the 6-core Intel high-end desktop chip from yesteryear. Yeah. And it's not a bad CPU by any means. We managed to overclock it and gave you some good performance boosts there. But I don't know. I've been really happy with my 8-core Ryzens.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things turn out. I may end up just having to upgrade.
Hey, Ryzen 2, the 3000 series, will probably be a good time to do that.
Yep. Well, before we get on to, or moving along to our next topic, coming out of the UK, have you ever heard of the NHS?
Yeah, the National Health Services over in Britain. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, apparently, starting next year, they're not going to be allowed to use fax machines.
Finally?
Finally.
You and I both come from healthcare IT backgrounds, so the fact that they're finally just drawing a line saying stop using frickin' fax machines is kind of a welcome thing, really. I mean, I had to deal with our fax server at our clinic, and it was actually decent. We had a digital fax server, so the calls would come in to a 8 port modem essentially, and it would come through. They would transmit the faxes, and it would digitize it into a PDF. And that's, if you're gonna keep faxes around, that's the way to do it. Honestly, having these stupid fax machines that just spit out page after page of cruise line vacation spam, because that's really all that comes through those nowadays, right? Nobody's actually using these for communication anymore, are they?
I wish. I still know of a number of hospitals in the US here that use them. And there are some payers that require them.
Yeah, I do know about the payers. I had to deal with that in our billing department. You know,
And
IT
it's
gets their
just,
hand involved in everything.
but it doesn't make any sense, especially due to the fact that if you actually consider you're dealing with paper that's spinning out that someone has to go pick up. And if the person waiting for it is not there waiting for it, it's very possible that your personally identifiable information could be sitting there on a fax machine for hours.
Well, to be fair, it's in a fax machine at the clinic, hopefully only accessible by clinic staff, which, as I know, is not always the case. There's patients that are wandering to and fro and being escorted around, and it's very easy for somebody to make a slight detour past one of the printers. I mean, I I haven't seen it, but I could see where it could happen pretty easily.
Well, you can also imagine that there are also, some hospitals use third-party janitorial staff. So you could end up with, people from who knows, what company, not necessarily with the hospital, that have access to locations where your information could end up.
Yeah, and those
So
papers that accidentally end up in the trash bin as opposed to the shred bin. Yeah, better safe than sorry is what I kind of think. Um,
and also, there's also the fact that if you actually think about it, there's been times where, these papers have been printed out, have been sometimes quotedly recycled, and really all it did is got partially shredded, but not, and ended up someplace else where that information still legible.
yeah, and I think those are kind of few and far between, though. I think a lot of the shredding companies are quite reputable and wouldn't really have that kind of a problem. But you got to
But it
look
also
at
depends on
kind of
how,
the,
distinct, how careful the various companies are.
yeah,
Is it just a case of possibility?
yeah, which is why here in the United States we have HIPAA and these HIT or high tech. It, those are all acronyms, by the way, if you want to look them up. Yeah, but you got all these standards that have been set for saying these are the best ways to do IT security. Well, they have a similar standard, for like clinicians and office staff, and using shred bins for PII and things like that. But really, I just don't really like the fax machine idea. It's kind of a backwards thing where you get this printout that you then go and scan into the computer, or you keep in a paper file, like for some of the lower tech places like old folks' homes, or, assisted living, that kind of thing. The fact that they have paper files still just amazes me. Maybe they're run by the same age of people that live there. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I know at least, I know a couple of, small like physical therapy offices that even today are using, all their systems are digital. So
Yeah.
all the records are now digital.
Yeah, and they should be. I mean, it's the easiest way to protect the data because you can encrypt it at rest, you can encrypt it in transport, you can easily send it via secure email, or even have your own, like zip encrypt kind of stuff. Maybe not using WinZip encryption because that's kind of weak, but it's something that would more be in like a 7-zip, that kind of stuff, where you could do AES 256 and send it via email that way with your password separate, or a patient portal. I mean, that's what everything's going to nowadays, isn't it? Patient portals.
Hmm, slowly.
except for maybe certain hospital software or something. But most of the clinic software that I've seen has had patient portal capability since the Meaningful Use Act and everything. They were trying to incentivize people to move into the modern era and use electronic health records.
Well, hopefully this will get them, out of the dark ages. But according to what information is there, they have until 2020.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest hangups, really, in transitioning off of fax is that one of the biggest payers, Medicare, is still requiring faxes for some things. There's actually services out there that you could do all your coding, submit your coding to the service, and then they would go and handle transmitting it to the payers. Things like sending faxes to Medicare and whatnot. Oh, craziness! It's craziness. I'm just glad that at least the UK is moving off of this old tech. Hopefully, they finally throw them in the dumpsters. But it looks like they're going to be going through and doing audits, and then maybe some fines or something until they're finally fax free. I think they have till 2020 to be paperless.
I think it was like March, April.
Well, I know that they can't buy any faxes after January of 2019.
After January, but they have, according to like an article on the Register, they're phasing them out by March 2020.
Oh, nice. Well, that'll be good. We'll see how it works. Hopefully, that'll encourage other payers in that area to move off of faxes. It's not going to help us here in the States, unless if they really see that it's working and then decide to do it here. But I don't know. There's just so many people that I guess they just don't get with the times, and they're still doing the old stuff because they don't know how to set up secure email. They don't know how to do all these basic healthcare high-tech things that they should. And maybe they just need to bring in outside consulting or something to bring them into the modern era rather than having paper files in a back room because the person didn't know how to use a file share in their local environment.
Well, it's definitely going to keep some of the hospitals over there busy. And while it's a topic for another time, that's going to go along with them having to phase out Windows Server 2008.
Oh, no. Can you imagine? Because everyone, when 2008 came out, because there was such a gap between that and 2003, everyone moved their installs of their healthcare software and all that off of 2003 and put it on 2008, probably R2 if they were smart. And now that's going to go away too. It's hitting end of life. It's been 10 years. Well, not since R2, but still.
Yeah, but I remember the 2003 switch over, and oh man.
Well, part of the big problem was a lot of the software providers didn't support Windows 7. They were still stuck in that XP era, clawing to that OS like it was lifeblood. I don't know. I think that's really the biggest problem, is getting software to get with the times, to update to support the newest browser or the newest OS. And there's a lot of companies that do well. You got your antiviruses, your mainstream can't live without kind of software that usually takes 6 months to release the new version to support the new like Redstone edition of Windows, like RS4, RS5. These big major patches. Yeah, the spring and fall patches of Windows, right? The version of Windows that has been delayed until, now. It was supposed to be out in October. It's December. It's finally landing. I don't know if you got it yet. I don't. I'm probably not going to touch it until February. We'll see.
I don't think I have, but I'm going to probably hold off a little.
But
Anyway,
speaking about big names like Microsoft and their Windows product, Apple is having some fun. Did you see what they're having to deal with in China?
not yet.
They've had a patent dispute with Qualcomm. In the States,
Uh-oh.
they got it leveled. They shook hands. I don't know. But in China, they still have a patent battle going on, and they actually won a preliminary ruling in a Chinese court, which will ban pretty much all of the pre 2018 iPhone models. And iPhone hasn't been doing very well this last year. I mean, they've been raking up the prices and not selling as many units, and their stock has been slowly on the downslide. I mean, I was just looking at it. They peaked back in what, October 4th. They were at like 227 ish. Yeah, 232 on October 3rd. And today, as of what, the 11th, no, the 10th, the last close that I got here, they're at 169. So they've definitely had a little bit of a spill going. I think a lot of that I don't know, momentum they had has been kind of waning. So be interesting to see where they go. I just think that they're a little overpriced for what they're offering. That's pretty much the short and skinny of it, in my opinion.
Well, I could always make a bad joke regarding gaming as well.
Oh, and what is that?
Well, if you're going to go and buy an iPhone, you have to expect DLC. Except now we're talking hardware.
Well, the thing about the iPhone is it's probably the best mobile gaming platform out there because there's a lot more games developed for it. There's been a lot of recent cross-platform games, especially now that a lot of them are using similar back-end APIs like Diablo. But I don't see that there's going to be a big differentiating software support. Yeah, I think you can get most apps in both platforms, and now it's more of a which platform do you like better? You have a lot of Macs, well, your iPhone's going to be the way to go, right? Everything just has this seamless iCloud thing going on. Android doesn't quite have that yet on the Windows side because they still have to have Google Drive compete against OneDrive and things like that. But
yeah, there's sometimes a downside to both, devices and the markets. And while I personally would, can definitely find more of the downsides. One of the things that I still say Apple does better at is at least keeping up with their OS updates across the board for the most part.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the benefit of having this top-down approach where they control the phone. They don't let the carrier control the phone. And that's partly why a lot of carriers are actually liking the Androids. They can get their hooks in a little better and have their pre-configured whatnots, They have their software that gets put on there and things like that. Whereas with the iPhone, Apple takes the stance of, well, if you don't want to just keep your fingers out of our business, we won't let you have an iPhone. Remember that exclusivity that they had with AT&T at the day one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Verizon was crying. They're like, oh, we need an iPhone because everyone wants an iPhone and we don't have it, so nobody wants to sign up with us.
It worked out for AT&T at least.
For a little while. Until people realized which was the better service.
Well, once the exclusivity wore off, then it was, anybody's game again.
Yeah. Well, since we are in a Google vein, how about if we move on to the next topic? You remember Google Plus?
Yeah, I think I might still have an account.
Yeah, the Google version of Facebook. Yeah, that didn't work out very well, did it?
Well, never got a whole lot of traction, but over the last, 6 months, it's been having problems.
it had good tie-ins with YouTube and whatnot, so I used it for video promotion and things like that, but I didn't really use it for any kind of Facebook things. Heck, I didn't even use it for pretty much anything, just like everyone else didn't use it, right?
Most I ever really used it for was, well, Ingress.
Oh yeah. Well, they've been putting the nail in the coffin for a while now. They've actually announced that they were going to kill Google Plus, but the news of the day is that they're actually going to accelerate that because they found a new security bug in their API calls. The APIs are what allows third-party developers to make calls into the Google Plus data and actually do things with it, make RSS feeds or watch people or even automate posts, things like that. Things like you see on Twitter, basically. But this bug, it showed more data than what was actually publicly available. But it was only available for 6 days and nobody used it because, hey, nobody uses Google Plus, right?
Yeah, I'm sure somebody got something, the old saying, once it's on the internet, it's on the internet.
Well, since it's an API call that's required, it technically wasn't on the internet. And Google does have some back end stuff that they can see who's using what, or at least if it's being used. So they saw or looked at that data and didn't see any indication that it had actually been exploited at all. So it,
We'll hope that's true then.
yeah, I mean, it would have affected 52.5 million users. No big deal. It's not like it's your credit report, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things of they have holes and they need to just kill it. I'm actually surprised they're still holding it out until April.
Well, the actual service is going to die in April, but they're actually shutting down the APIs sooner because rather than worrying about trying to make sure that none of these holes still exist, I mean, they did fix this one hole, but they're just going to shut down the APIs. You don't have to worry about it after that.
Well, we'll see how that one plays out as time moves forward.
Yeah. But there is one thing that is going to affect me as we transition to the next story. Are you holding out for an S10? I'm holding out for a Galaxy S10. I don't know about you.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I'm kind of a fan of doing the even number upgrades for the Galaxies. I mean, I don't have to get the newest, shiniest phone every year, but every 2 years, even though it's still pricey, seems to be the way to go, right? A good cadence like that.
I personally thought the S5 was fine. I mean, I ran on my S5 until it decided it didn't want to function any longer.
Well, the S5 did have a few issues that people reported with it, and I think he kind of fell victim to one of them. But I mean, I have a coworker whose wife has an S5 that has had a similar issue to yours, just speed slowdowns and things like that. But it seems that the odd number of Galaxies are just token upgrades. They don't really do like major steps, maybe a little bit of a CPU bump, that kind of thing. But it seems that on the even number is when they do a lot of their major revisions. They added the IPS or IP57, the waterproofing, dustproofing that they did on the S4, right?
Yeah, S5 tried to improve that a little bit.
Yeah, but it kind of maintained it. Maybe it's IP67. I don't know. I'm sure a commenter will correct us.
Yeah, the S6 was the move away from having an accessible battery compartment,
which pissed me off to no end. But
dude, there's a reason I stuck on my S5.
I know, right? but once I got one of those external battery packs, then the replaceable battery became kind of a moot point, unless if your battery just died because you left it in the car over the evening and it froze. Other than normal wear and tear on the battery after 2-3 years and having to replace it, there wasn't really a reason to have that swappable battery unless if you're really a road warrior. But that's where those portable chargers come in handy, because you don't have to pop the battery out. You don't have to shut down your phone in order to swap a battery. You can just plug it in and go.
Well, my upside to having the swappable battery was when I accidentally or rather incidentally damaged the USB port on my phone. I could no longer use that. So being able to swap my battery was the only way I could actually give it a charge.
Yeah, that is the other downside, right? But once you've done that, it becomes harder and harder to manage the phone and get stuff off of it. You still have to like transfer via Wi-Fi or sync to the cloud. But the Galaxy S10 rumors abound, let me tell you. They're talking about a Snapdragon 855, and obviously an Exynos, I guess is how you pronounce that, the 9820 that's coming out. That's going to be for the international version. The Snapdragon 855 is going to be for the US. And the 855 actually outperforms the international version by a little bit. It's not a huge difference, but it actually brings it pretty in line with what the Apple CPU is doing with their new their iPhone 10XS Plus, whatever they're calling it nowadays.
iPhone 10 letter.
Yeah, plus. The $1,500 one. How about that? Does that help? It's going to bring it within maybe 10,000 points of the Antutu score for the iPhone. I think it scored 350,000, and this is scoring about 343,000. So it's pretty close. It becomes a moot point to that. It's like shaving FPS. Oh, this one did 197 frames a second versus this one's 205. It's a wash, right?
And there's also the camera changes that are looking like they should be interesting as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're talking about instead of having that center camera with the little notch that everyone makes fun of, they're going to be doing what they call DPSS laser drilled cutouts for the front screen, where they actually cut a hole. It's going to be on the right side of the screen, it looks like, based on some of the leaks that are out there. It's going to be top right corner where you currently see the time of day. They're just going to kind of black that out, shift that to the left a little bit, it looks like. Actually, the time's going to be flipped on the far left, and the icons are going to stack up against the right side against this camera cutout. So they're just moving the notch, really. It's going to shift. But it's where Android has that little bar, so nobody really cared, right?
I'll see how that ends up playing out once it arrives. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to trying to get my hands on one of those.
And since it's not centered, the people might not be looking right at the camera when they snap the picture. But who knows? I think it shouldn't be too hard to get used to. And they are talking.
People know how to center themselves anyway. I mean,
yeah,
I've seen the weird photos people take.
Yeah, they are talking about having the S10 Plus have 3 cameras on the back. That's going to be interesting, huh?
What's that trying to do? A triangle of photos?
No, one of the cameras is going to be like a 2x optical zoom. And then another one is going to be a high resolution, like a 24 megapixel or something like that. And the third one is going to be a telephoto with a 8 megapixel or something. But they can all take pictures at the same time and then package that all into a special new image format. And I don't know much beyond that. I just was reading about it. But having all these pictures so that you can then start to do special things, such as having a animated picture where one person is standing still, but there's motion or something happening, like if the person's blowing bubbles, I think is the example they used. The person could be blowing bubbles. The bubbles will be drifting across and popping, but the person would be holding still. and they could do weird things like that.
It should be good to see what kind of things we can end up doing with that once it's available then.
Probably the exact same thing we did with all the other camera features that have come before. Utterly ignore them. I think the one camera thing that came out that people actually used is panoramic. I think that's the only thing. You remember when, I think it was the S4, it came out with the camera that you could take a quick GIF picture. And yes, I said GIF, not GIF. So a quick GIF picture where it would record like 3 seconds of video and make it into a GIF. And then you could have a motion picture. I used it once. I got a picture of my dog and he kind of just shook his head at me. And that was it. That's the only one I got.
Dog's way of saying, why?
Yeah,
Just
I know.
why?
Even he shook his head at me going, why are you using that feature? Hey, at least I can say that I haven't used any of the Instagram filter garbage that comes on these phones nowadays. Yeah,
I don't even have to access those because I just don't care.
Yeah, exactly, right? HDR, that was probably the other thing that they did that people use now, is that built-in HDR. And honestly, I'm glad they did. I was happy when they came out with that.
Well, going from the high end of the spectrum to the low end of the, or lower end of the spectrum, is some news about the Galaxy A8.
Well,
this is the...
I wouldn't necessarily call the A8S a low end. I would call it mid-range. Probably mid-range.
All right, we'll go mid-range then. I guess it is around the $500, so I guess it isn't that low end, yeah.
Yeah. But they're launching it in South Korea, so I'm not sure if it'll even be available in the States. But it's a 6.4-inch screen, Infinity O display. It's going to be the first screen that they release that has this DPSS laser drilled hole with the camera. And this one is in the top right corner, it looks like. No, top left. My bad. And this will give us a good example of what it looks like and how it works. But it looks like they're going to support up to 6 gig of RAM in this thing, 128 gig of internal memory. It looks like they also have a top tier model that has 8 gig of RAM. Which
there's multiple potential versions of this thing.
Yeah, I know, right? And it kind of gives some credence to the S10 being speculated to have 8 to 12 gig of RAM. I mean, that's crazy just thinking about it, right? And they're talking even upwards to 512 gig of storage, maybe even more. I don't know. It would be easy.
Well, I mean, we're just talking about the same kind of storage you can get on like an SD card.
Yeah. But they're going to be doing a 24 megapixel sensor, 10 megapixel telephoto camera with a 2x optical zoom, and a 5 megapixel depth sensor. And you remember what I was telling you about that packed video picture file? I bet you this is going to do that. So it would be interesting to see some of those pictures coming off of these things. But
it looks like some of the stuff they're doing with that is also trading out the QI wireless charging.
Oh, well, this is a lower end model, so it probably wouldn't have had that anyway. And they did get rid of the 3.5 millimeter on this thing as well, so you wouldn't be able to plug in your headset. So people on flights might not be too happy about having to turn off their Bluetooth and not be able to use their phone.
Who knows? Maybe you'll just have to get another, something very similar to
the Apple dongles.
Dongles.
Yeah.
All the dongles.
Here, let's just plug this in our Type-C and we'll just have a squid of connectors coming off the bottom. Each for the low price of $39.99, right? Hey, this
Which
thing's
you can
only
then go to like, some other company and buy it for like $5.
Yeah, I know, right? Unless if you require them to have that security chip like Apple does, because, they're worried that you might actually want to liberate your phone. I guess
I just think it's kind of funny because when you see all this stuff, like it requires this, requires that, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, if I ever end up in like Hong Kong again, I'll just go hit one of the tech markets and buy something for like $5.
Yeah, there you go. I don't see anything on here that talks about 5G. And the S10 is rumored to be able to support 5G, which will be one of the first stateside phones that supports 5G. But considering we don't have 5G here and it probably won't be here for a few years, it's kind of a moot point.
It supports 5G. We don't have it. It supports 5G. You're not
That's
listening,
nice.
are you?
Don't worry. When the iPhone comes out and it supports 5G, everyone will hail it as this marvel and the first one to ever do it, even though it's 2 years behind what Android did, right? It's happened before.
It's happened several times before. I mean, yeah, Apple was the first ones who, pulled out the full screen model, and they kept ahead of the market on that for a few years, but very quickly, everyone else caught up and began to exceed them.
Well, speaking of catching up, did you hear what Voyager 2 did as of the 10th of December?
So long. Thanks for all the fish.
It finally caught up to Voyager 1, not necessarily in distance from the sun, but in reaching interplanetary space. Or interstellar space, not interplanetary. It's already been interplanetary, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit further out now.
Just a little. It finally made it past the heliopause and is now
Heliosphere.
Well, the sphere is inside the heliopause is that buffer just between the sphere and interstellar space where everything just kind of quiets down. You remember? They're not quite out to the Oort cloud yet, but they're getting there.
I always get those terms confused.
Don't worry, sometimes I do too. It's hard to kind of keep up on all this different tech sector and science and all that. It takes a lot of effort.
But one of the things I heard about this is that the fun thing about the Voyager 2 probe hitting that point is it still had certain sensors still running that was able to track stuff that the first one didn't.
Yeah, the plasma science experiment instrument that stopped working on Voyager 1 back in like 1980. It's still functioning on Voyager 2, so they were able to not only get a new sample of the same data of Voyager 1 did as it is traveling through space, but it got new samples of new data from this plasma science experiment. So it's definitely a monumentous thing, even though it's 70s, 60s tech even, probably.
70s. I think it was launched, 77? Something like that?
I'd have to look. I couldn't say for sure.
Well, it's been out there a long time. At least we know what it takes to get to the edge of the solar system at this point.
Well, it does say over 40 years after launch, so it's definitely at least 78. But either way,
it launched on August 20th, 1977.
There you go. Old tech for sure. But yeah, they basically knew that they made it out of the heliopause because they are no longer getting the low energy radiation that's from the solar wind, and they're actually getting the higher energy, what do they call it? I'm scanning real quick. You keep talking. I'll be right back.
Yeah, this is something I actually had to go read out about it. But there was
solar
wind, interstellar space, cosmic ray subsystem, the low energy charged particle instrument, and the magnetometer to confirm that it has in fact left the building, according to the article. And just for distance, says it clocked in 18 billion kilometers.
Yeah, just a short distance. Small jaunt.
With information having to travel 16 and a half hours from the spacecraft back to Earth. That's a delay.
Yeah, but that's nothing as much as like a light year.
Yeah, it's just one of those things of, so how long, what kind of lag you got on that? You don't want to know.
Yeah. Well, just wait till it finally hits about the year 2025 when they're expecting it might will start losing enough power from its plutonium source that it'll actually stop communicating with us. Finally, it'll be a little bit more delayed by then, I'm sure.
It's really interesting to hear that we actually can still get information from this thing, that far out, still running.
I know, right?
So it should be fun to hear, see what kind of additional bits of information can be gleaned from that old probe.
Yeah.
But
Well,
moving on, I think
more
coming back to
information
Earth.
means places to store it, right?
Yeah, and we always need more of that stuff.
Well, we know that Seagate wants to do their MAMR stuff, the heat assisted magnetic recording. And we know that Western Digital was planning on doing what they call MAMR, which is microwave assisted magnetic recording. But Toshiba just announced that they're also going to be doing the microwave assisted magnetic recording. As PMR, the current thing that they do, the perpendicular magnetic recording, which is a bunch of basic, what you would imagine is rods with plus and minus poles on them. It's standing vertically on a platter, hence perpendicular to the platter.
This is going back to the good old spindle drives that we're still using to this day.
And as they write those perpendiculars, they have to write clusters of them so that they can get a good signal on the write. And so you flip tens of these things at a time to be able to get a good signal and not overwrite data and accidentally flip stuff, things like that. And just because of the size of the heads and things. But what the heat assisted, and in this case, the microwave assisted, will do is it'll disturb the surface of the platter using heat generation, essentially. One is by doing a laser beam with the MAMR, and then this one's microwave heating up the platter. It'll actually heat up the platter so you can flip a smaller portion of those bits. So you're only affecting a handful of them. And once it's no longer being heated or microwaved, then it's kind of solidifies. It prevents it from flipping under a normal magnetic from the heads. It's more of a way to direct interface with a smaller amount of those bits so that they can get better densities. They're talking of going up to 4 terabit per square inch densities, whereas we're right now in the 700 to 1 terabit, or should I say 700 to 1000 gigabit per inch. I mean, that's 4-5 time density increases.
Yeah, a little bit more than that, I'd think. But
they're talking about it going all the way up to 40 terabyte drives, whereas we're currently looking at 16 terabytes for perpendicular right now. And that's about the top end of what they're planning on doing.
And perpendicular is still pushing those higher numbers. It's getting harder and harder. Because we need right now, finding those really big drives, they're coming out very, very slowly over the years if you actually pay attention.
Yeah.
And even then, those really high capacity drives, they have to restrict it to the 3.5 size. So the big drives, whereas notebook drives, I think the biggest I've seen is maybe a 2 gig or 2 terabyte.
No, they have the thicker versions that you can get a 5 terabyte with.
Oh, they managed one.
Yeah. They're definitely not as thin as a slim notebook drive, but they're out there. They have to use special interfaces like helium instead of normal air things like that in order to accomplish it, because they stack an extra platter or two in there.
And I'm certain that the cost that goes along with that, though, that'd be pretty high.
It's up there. It drives the cost gets more expensive as you get closer to the top end. It's like with CPUs and any other tech, GPUs, RAM. You pay for the extra space just like you pay for performance.
And the current top end is a Seagate 5 terabyte that I can find, but
That is correct.
it's only a 5400.
Yep.
So,
You don't get the 15K, that's for sure.
so right now, I mean, it's nice to see they can put they're going to be able to push it higher, but I think as it stands, SSDs are going to be really keeping the market running.
Well, I think that's what's causing these disks to kind of run away so much is they have to keep ahead of them. I mean, you can go get an SSD with 2 terabytes of storage, and yeah, you're looking at $500, $600 for that, but you're going to get phenomenal performance out of it.
And I think I actually just barely got one for under 300.
Yeah. And that's what's causing these like 900 gig, 7200, 15K RPM drives are starting to go to the wayside because you can get an SSD for a similar price.
Sometimes lower, as it were. And so you're looking at much faster for similar or lower price. And it's hard to say why keep with the spindle.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big thing is a lot of the traditional use for these cheap 500 gig, 1 terabyte drives are just going to disappear as they end up incorporating SSDs instead. You'll probably get a lot less returns for being slow, even though all the other components suck. But, you know, you got to keep ahead where you can and cut corners where you can if you're going to hit a price point.
Yeah, very quickly, the old spindle drives are just becoming good for only, general storage.
Well, there's plenty of that out there. I know of very few people who don't have a very large home movie and photo collection. I can't store mine on the cloud. I know that. I think Google or Apple would have a fun time charging me an arm and a leg to keep all that in the cloud. And I know my internet connections data cap would have a hard time with me having all of that in the cloud and accessing it on a regular basis.
Well, that's the price of storing a lot of information.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about data caps and ISPs later. I mean, that's kind of a bummer we don't want to get into right now, but maybe something
another time.
Yeah, maybe something exciting we can talk about. Have you seen the new motion GIF or whatever that it is that they call it for the new Sonic the Hedgehog movie?
This is something I'm a little curious about because on one hand, I'm an old school Sonic fan. I've played all the original Sonic games. I still have a working Genesis with those games. So I don't mind. I love pulling those things out because the thing about Sonic is it's fun to play fast. But then if you go and look at how they've tried to run Sonic with storylines in some of the newer games, you start getting into some weird territory. Or you can look at some of the cartoons they've done with Sonic, and those have been kind of all over the place as well.
Well, you remember watching Sonic the Hedgehog, The Adventures of Sonic, Saturday morning cartoons, right?
Yeah, both of the first 2 renditions of the cartoon were meh, but they're fun.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I always tried to catch Sonic the Hedgehog in the morning.
It's hard not to enjoy something where it's talking about fast and chili dogs.
Of course, and it had Tails. Tails was a very fun character in my opinion. I actually liked him maybe even a little bit better than Sonic. Yeah, don't burn me at the stake.
Well, Tails had a little more character to him, where Sonic was, pretty much just all about going fast.
Well, he was a macho character, right? He was played off as this self-absorbed macho kind of, everything's about me kind of character, whereas Tails was a little bit more down to earth. They played him off as a younger character too, so there was that.
Yeah, seeing what all they have is a teaser on this movie, but
yeah, a little zip with a little bit of ring collection, and it's a live action though. I mean, you can kind of see in the picture, it looks like the guy is wearing some kind of tight muscle shirt, maybe.
That fully looks CG to me. I mean, 100%.
It could be CG, yeah. I mean, it looks almost like there's a shirt with a different color hand coming out of it. And of course, you got the sneakers, which are totally artistic.
Well, kind of. I mean, he did wear red sneakers.
I mean, where's the white socks? Didn't he wear white socks? I thought he wore white socks coming out of those sneakers.
Not always.
And I think the thing that's got everyone on edge right now, if you read all of the, I guess, Twitterverse or whatever you want to call it, is instead of going with hedgehog spines, the things that the little quills on the back of his character in 8-bit mode were supposed to represent, they went with what looks like fur. I mean, like a haircut, like a Dragon Ball Z thing going on here. What do you think of that?
How they have him rendered in the photo definitely doesn't look quill-like.
Yeah,
I mean, it's got the shape of Sonic, at least on the head, but yeah, I can see the fur.
Well, according to the actual directors and such, they're saying that in order to make Sonic feel okay, and not just running around nude, was to give him fur instead of quills or whatever, It kind of like a lot of the characters that you see portrayed in CG nowadays. Like you look at like Doug the dog in Up or things like that. They got the CG fur kind of thing going on. Secret Life of Pets. They're doing hyper realism in this show, it looks like, so they had to do something. Obviously, you didn't want to run into something like CG Turtles or something like that. They wanted something a little more softer feel. And I don't know, have you seen some of the fur that they've been managing to pull off in video games nowadays?
Yeah, it's gotten really good.
And you
Same
look
goes with any hair in general.
Well, look at some of the CG that happens in like some of the Blizzard stuff with Greymane. I think they pull off Greymane really well with fur, and I think it can work pretty well with this. And I think that there's been enough tech development to fur in the CGI world that they could probably pull it off a little bit better than quills. I mean, if you want to look at some kind of not hyper realism, but look at the CG movie Sing. Did you see that?
I skipped that one.
Well, they had hedgehogs, I think it was, or porcupines. I would have to read to see exactly what they were trying to be. I think it was hedgehogs, though. And they did pretty well at making quills. It was obviously cartoony, and so there weren't like as much density as there might have been, or the distribution or color or anything like that. But I don't know. They pulled it off, but then again, they had to wear clothing, just like in Zootopia or any of the anthropomorphic kind of animal shows. They all wear clothing.
They made that world feel a bit more real, like it was more like our world. Whereas, in general, the world of Sonic the Hedgehog is a bit different. And, you have some humans, at least in some of the games, and in others there are more humans. But in general, it's been more like, Robotnik or Eggman, depending on what they want to call him, what sounds like Robotnik.
Yeah.
And maybe a smattering of other humans, but otherwise there's robots, and then the generally anthropomorphic animals, but rarely do they have clothes.
Exactly. And I think that they were trying to stay true to the original Sonic by keeping Sonic unclothed, because the only thing he wore was sneakers to kind of suggest that he was a runner, right? That was the whole focus, was, oh look, he has sneakers. But they didn't want to make it feel like some guy in a fursuit or something like that.
Well, I remember in the old cartoon, they actually purported that the reason he needed his shoes is that he had to need or had to wear them in order to be able to reach those high speeds, because if he didn't, he would set his feet on fire.
Makes sense. I mean, they show a little bit of smoke or whatever on this intro speed thing. And even with the steel at the end, you can see the little bit of smoke whiffs coming off of his feet. Of course, his whole body is emanating what looks like, I don't know, Flash Speed Force. Hopefully, they don't go too far into that direction and make him like a Flash knockoff. That would suck, wouldn't it?
And it's gonna be, I would say it might be interesting just to see how it turns out, but it unfortunately could swing in either direction, because I've seen so many horribly or terribly done stories with Sonic.
Or video
not just
game adaptation to movies in general.
well, it doesn't sound like they're actually taking it. They're basing it on the game, but not basing it, on the game's story. Because a lot of the old stories don't, or all the old games especially, don't have story.
What, you mean like Detective Pikachu? Just saying.
Well, it has a story. There's a story. I mean, there is a Detective Pikachu cartoon or anime.
Yeah.
So they at least have something to work with there, sort of.
Maybe.
I've not seen it myself. I don't know anything about it. So, but the thing about Sonic that I'm mostly worried about, just what kind of story they can actually give it. I mean, like I said, with the evolutions of Sonic when it came to TV media, it's gone from okay to roughly okay, and then it has gotten worse.
Well, I hope they try to go a little bit further than like Spider-Man versus the Green Goblin, because I see that as probably one of the more likely scenarios where this evil Dr. Robotnik makes this flying machine contraption and tries to take over, and Sonic has to defeat him somehow, right?
Well, you just described most of the Sonic games.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, they can do that, but maybe make it a little bit better than, Sonic versus Dr. Evil or something.
Well, you saw the casting for Robotnik, right?
I did not. Did they get Mike Myers to do it?
No.
1 million gold rings.
That would have been funny, in all honesty.
That would be a good punchline, wouldn't
it? No, it's Jim Carrey.
Oh, he's Dr. Oh no. That either has the ability to go really, really bad or really, really good. And
yeah,
I'm thinking it's almost cringeworthily funny.
If you know that describes that's Robotnik. He usually is cringy anyway. But
yeah,
like I said, especially with that on top, it can go either way. So I mean, it's gonna be one thing to see how they do the animation on Sonic, because it's gonna be animation, at least for him.
Yeah.
If he and then it's a question of what other characters are going to throw in, because there's a good dozen of characters that they could pull from, whether it be from the actual games or from other TV media or what I don't know. The uproar over the fur, it's going to be a wait and find out, because just having there's what we see in that still just doesn't really tell us much. So it could be fur, yeah, it could be quills. I don't know. It looks, or it could be a combination thereof.
Nah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be fur.
So But
But I mean,
either way, it's gonna be a wait and find out.
there's a lot of people that are just picking on it because they're like, oh, it's a movie made for furries or something like that, where they think it's going to be some kind of sexualized or something. I don't know what they're going out. Maybe it's the same reason they use homophobic slang or something to make fun of people. They're just throwing words out there because they want to stir the pot. But I'm more of a movie buff. I like to go to a movie to watch a movie. Even if it's based on a game, I don't bring the game preconceptions into it. I don't go to watch Marvel movies sitting there going, well, that's not like the comic book. You know, I go to watch the movie and to see what the movie brings to the table. And I can appreciate it or dislike it for those merits on their own. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why I say it's gonna be a wait and find out, because we see a little bit about the animation there, but not much to really pay attention to. For those who are saying, well, it's a furry movie. Okay.
So, right?
You like, these other movies like Zootopia and Sing, right?
Yeah.
You got a problem with those?
Yeah. Was Robin Hood, the Disney Robin Hood, a furry movie? No.
I'm sure somebody could go off on that. I mean, I've heard. We're not going to go to that.
Yeah, let's not go to that. But I think when we get some more teaser trailers, some actual movie footage like we did with Detective Pikachu, we'll get a little bit more comfortable with the idea, especially when he's not a silhouette anymore and you can actually see him. You'll probably get a little bit of that thing like we did with Detective Pikachu. But I think after a little bit, we'll be used to it and it will be able to move on.
Well, personally, when I saw the trailer for Detective Pikachu, I laughed.
Yeah, it looks like a fun movie just as a movie. It doesn't matter if you deem Pokemon as a child's thing or not. There's plenty of adults that enjoy the content, play any of the Pikachu or Pokemon in general games. You do what you enjoy, right?
I mean, it's kind of like saying Minecraft is for kids. Says who?
Yeah, says who? Yeah, I can think of plenty of people who enjoy Minecraft as adults because
I know hundreds.
thousands. Yeah.
I can list off, hundreds of people personally just because I mod for multiple YouTubers on one of the biggest Minecraft servers. So
Exactly.
But that Sonic is just gonna be a wait and find out, really, because we don't have a whole lot to work off of. No matter what people really think, I'm worried about the story.
Yep.
So,
but as news develops, we'll bring it to you here. We'll be doing our weekly digest, so be sure to come back, check us out, subscribe, like, and check out Turk's channel. He's got some great stuff over there with Minecraft tutorials, gaming in general. Be sure to check out some of our live streams as well. And we'll see you guys next week here on the Wolf Digest.
have a good one.